A mysterious man wearing a long coat commits the strangest bank robbery in Japan's history. The heist was neither armed nor involved hostage-taking, nor did it include digging an underground tunnel or any other scenario one might imagine. This method of robbery had never occurred in any other case before. However, the story is much deeper than just a bank theft. I don't want to spoil the details for you, so let's dive into the tale. Hello, you're now on the Rex Stories channel, home to mysterious and thrilling stories. Our story takes place in 1948 in Japan, more than 70 years ago. At that time, Japan had just emerged from a very significant event, World War II. Japan was a major player in this war, and the conflict between it and America was intense. In the end, as we all know, America dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But in addition to those 2 bombs, America dropped a massive number of bombs on Japan, especially on the capital, Tokyo. Ultimately, the Japanese Empire fell, and the emperor announced surrender in 1945. This was the last major event of World War II. Japan's surrender marked the end of the war. After the surrender, America occupied Japan and began to administer the country. The Japanese people were living in extremely difficult conditions during that period. Japan was just coming out of the largest war it had ever faced, and famine, homelessness, and diseases were rampant everywhere. 3 years had passed since the end of the war, and the year 1948 arrived, the year in which our events begin. The situation remained the same, with America still managing Japan. The story began on January 26, 1948, at the start of the year. On that day, a man entered a branch of a bank called the Imperial Bank of Japan. This branch was a small one located in an area known as Shinmachi. On that day, there were 21 employees working at the branch, but 7 of them were absent due to illness, including the branch manager himself. You might wonder, is it possible for a third of the employees to be absent on the same day due to illness? Yes, because at that time, diseases were widespread, and people were emerging from war, famine, and homelessness. Thus, the remaining number of employees in the branch was only 14. In the afternoon of that day, a man entered the bank wearing a long brown coat. On his left arm above the elbow was a badge resembling that of a team leader, indicating that he was a government employee from the Ministry of Health. The man approached the employees and requested to speak with the branch manager. They informed him that the manager was unavailable because he was ill, but he could speak with the deputy manager. The deputy manager, named Takahiro Yoshida, came to talk with the man, who introduced himself as an epidemiologist from the Ministry of Health. He said, "There is a water well in this area that may be causing an outbreak of dysentery, and we are trying to control the disease and prevent its spread. Therefore, I brought a vaccine that everyone here needs to take." Dysentery is a severe intestinal inflammation caused by a type of bacteria and is considered a contagious disease. When the deputy manager heard this from the doctor, he hesitated a little, but after the doctor stated that he was there on the orders of the American authorities, he became very cooperative. The deputy manager gathered the 14 employees present in the branch. There were also 2 additional people in the bank, the wife and daughter of one of the employees, bringing the total number to 16. The doctor stood before them and requested a teapot. They brought him a pot of Japanese green tea and poured tea into 17 cups, one more than the number of people present. The doctor said, "The medicine I'm going to give you may harm your teeth, so you need to drink it quickly. I will show you the correct method." The doctor quickly drank from his cup in front of them. Then he began pouring the medicine, which was in a small bottle, into the cups in equal amounts. Everyone drank the tea quickly, just like the doctor. After a minute, some of the employees began to complain of a burning sensation in their throats. The doctor assured them that this was normal and would pass quickly. The employees asked to go to the bathroom to wash their mouths. The doctor agreed, and the employees rushed to the bathroom due to the burning sensation. And during those moments, The doctor took the business card he had given to the deputy manager and placed it in his pocket, then collected his belongings and the small cups he had brought with him. After that, he began to wander through the employees' offices, taking approximately 160,000 yen from the drawers, along with a check for 17,000 yen. If we try to estimate this amount in today's dollars, accounting for inflation and currency fluctuations, it comes to about $10,000. In other words, it wasn't a small sum, but it wasn't enormous either. When the employees started returning from the restroom, many of them collapsed to the floor, one after another. In just 15 minutes, the mysterious doctor had left the bank, leaving behind 10 bodies. The poison he had given them was lethal, and one of the bodies was that of an 8-year-old girl, the daughter of one of the employees who was waiting for her father to finish his work. By around 4 in the afternoon, one of the bank employees who had survived the poisoning screamed for help. The police were notified and arrived immediately. 6 bank employees were still alive and they were taken to a nearby hospital. 2 of them died there, while 4 others survived. The police investigations began the next day, bringing in senior detectives from headquarters to take over the case. The first thing they did was interrogate the 4 survivors to get descriptions of the criminal doctor. Unfortunately, their descriptions were not very helpful, especially since the criminal had no distinctive features. The only thing the investigators could conclude from the employees' accounts was that the mysterious man was between 40 and 50 years old. The investigators then began examining the crime scene, the bank branch, and noticed something significant. The criminal had left a lot of money behind. Although he had stolen a large sum equivalent to nearly 3 years' salary for an employee, he left behind even larger amounts. As mentioned, he stole about 160,000 yen along with a check for 17,000 yen, but there was another sum of 400,000 yen in an open safe next to the offices from which he had taken the money. The question here is, why didn't he take the additional amount that was right in front of him? One might think that he was perhaps in a hurry or stressed, or simply didn't notice it. But the criminal had been in the bank for about 15 minutes, and the safe was right in front of him and not locked. He could have easily pulled the door open and found the money inside. So, it was strange that he didn't pay attention or even attempt to open it. The second question that perplexed the investigators was, how did the criminal drink the same medicine or poison from the same bottle he had used with the employees and remain unaffected? The police were sure that the criminal had drunk from the same bottle. By the way, one of the 4 surviving employees was Yoshida, the deputy manager of the bank, who told the police that the criminal had given him a business card that contained his name, or at least the name he identified himself with. The name might have been fake, but Yoshida confirmed that he couldn't remember the name written on the card, but he was certain that the criminal had handed him this card. The police attempted to search for the card in the bank but did not find it, leading them to believe that the criminal had taken it with him. Investigations continued, and in the following days, the detectives discovered that the stolen check for 17,000 yen had been cashed at another bank called Yosuda Bank, which is about 3 kilometers away from the robbed bank. The criminal had gone to this second bank and cashed the stolen check. The police went to the bank and requested the information provided by the person who cashed the check, as he was supposed to give them his name and address. However, the police quickly discovered that the name and address recorded by the criminal were fake. Unfortunately, these leads always ended up going nowhere. Nevertheless, the investigations continued, and the detectives were shocked by an unexpected discovery. It turned out that there had been 2 similar incidents at different banks. The same man wearing a long brown coat entered both banks and claimed to be a doctor, stating that there was a widespread disease and that the employees needed to be given medication. The first incident occurred in October of the previous year, 1947, approximately 3 months before the fatal event we discussed. In this incident, the mysterious doctor entered a branch of a bank called Sudoha, located about 10 kilometers from the bank where the deadly incident took place. This man entered the branch manager's office and claimed to be a doctor, stating the same words he had used before. Indeed, the same thing happened. The manager gathered the employees, and everyone consumed the medicine. The doctor kept glancing at his watch suspiciously, but after 10 minutes without any effect on the employees, he said, "Okay, it seems the medicine is starting to work. Thank you for your cooperation," and simply gathered his belongings and left the bank. Because nothing happened to anyone, this incident went unreported, and investigators concluded that this criminal was testing the poison and its effectiveness, likely making this one of his first experiments. Since none of the employees were affected, this was deemed the first incident. The second incident occurred on January 20, 1948, just about a week before the fatal incident. This time, the criminal entered a branch of a bank called Tokyo Bank and again claimed to be a doctor from the Ministry of Health. He informed the bank manager that a local family named the Oritani family was suffering from dysentery and that they had information indicating that the father of this family, Mr. Oritani, had visited the bank that day. So it was essential to disinfect the place and its employees and provide them with medication. However, the manager did not immediately believe him, so he told the doctor, "I need you to verify that." Indeed, he went and checked the records, discovering that Mr. Oritani was a real person who had visited the bank that day and deposited a significant amount. But the problem was that the registered address they had did not match the address given by the doctor. The manager approached the supposed doctor and said, "The registered address we have for Mr. Oritani does not match the address you provided. Are you sure you didn't make a mistake?" The doctor replied, "I don't know. Maybe the employees at the ministry made a mistake. I will return to the office and look for proof, and I will come back to you in an hour." The doctor exited the bank, clearly showing signs of anxiety and urgency, as if he were about to be caught. Indeed, he never returned to the bank. The police realized that the bank manager saved his life and the lives of all the employees with him by investigating the matter and not taking the doctor's suspicious words and a neat appearance as a sign of credibility. The crucial point is that neither of these incidents was reported because they resulted in no harm or fatalities. However, it was clear to investigators that these two incidents were preliminary tests by the criminal. Investigators also discovered that in both incidents, the criminal had given the bank managers a business card as proof of his identity, but the two cards bore different names. The card he used in the second incident, which occurred a week prior, was in the name of Dr. Jerry Yamaguchi. After the police investigated him, they found that he was just a fictitious name with no real existence. However, the card used in the first incident, which happened 3 months earlier, was in the name of Dr. Matsui Ren. This doctor was a real person. Immediately, the police were able to contact him and arrest him, starting their investigation. However, Dr. Matsui Ren managed to prove he had a solid alibi during the time of the crime, stating that he was at a meeting, and indeed there were several witnesses who confirmed his presence at that meeting, which meant he was not the criminal. But this was not the end of the road. Dr. Matsui told the investigators that these cards, specifically the one found in the bank, were a limited edition, with only 100 copies printed. In Japan, there are specific customs for exchanging business cards, which means it is not necessary to hand out the card to anyone you meet on the street as marketers do. Rather, business cards are given to specific individuals on special occasions, such as when you want to introduce yourself in an official setting or when you have an ongoing business relationship with someone. Each party gives the other their card, and it is not just one party giving their card. There must be an exchange. These customs were prevalent in Japan at the time. Dr. Matsui also had a unique habit. Whenever he gave his card to anyone, he would write on the back the time and place he provided it. This means he would note when and where he gave the card. This detail allowed investigators to track the individuals who exchanged cards with him. He stated that he had made 100 copies of this card and he still had 8 of them. This means he distributed 92 cards, and among the 92 people who received cards, 22 were immediately ruled out because they were women, while 62 individuals were tracked down and cleared of any connection to the crime as they had strong alibis. Only 8 suspects remained. This investigation process and the classification of suspects to narrow down to just 8 individuals took a long time. During this time, the victims' bodies were sent to hospitals affiliated with 2 universities. The first hospital was associated with Tokyo University and the second with Keio University. The preliminary results from the examinations of the bodies from both universities confirmed the presence of a toxic compound containing cyanide in their systems. Of course, cyanide is a well-known substance, and it is toxic, but you should keep in mind that they did not know the exact nature of this compound. They knew the compound contained toxic cyanide, but there were other things and substances in it that they had not yet discovered. Keep this in mind, as it will be very important in the upcoming parts of the story. All they could currently confirm is that the criminal indeed used a poison. Investigators began to think about how the criminal could pretend to drink the poison in front of the employees without being affected. I mean, if you remember, the 4 surviving witnesses said they were sure that the criminal drank from the same bottle the victims drank from. One theory suggested that the criminal likely added some type of oil inside the bottle, as the oil's density is lighter, causing it to float above the toxic compound. When he poured himself a cup, he did not pour himself any poison, but rather poured himself oil, perhaps because the poison was mixed with the oil. Perhaps this is why the 4 employees survived. Of course, the explanation for this maneuver is that the criminal did it to instill confidence in the employees that they were drinking poison, and to also show them that they should drink quickly, because if one of them hesitated and took the poison slowly, they might notice something suspicious about the taste, and in that case, they wouldn't drink it. Anyway, let's return to the case. About 6 months had passed since the incident, and the police were still continuing their investigations. As we mentioned, they managed to identify 8 suspects through the business cards distributed by Dr. Matsui. In the end, they began to focus on one suspect among the 8, a suspect who matched many characteristics of the criminal. This suspect was a man in his 50s named Saramichi Hirosawa. He was a painter and an art professor at a university, living off the sale of his artwork and the very meager salary provided by his teaching position. The reason the police focused on Saramichi was that they discovered he had been arrested 4 times previously, related to his attempts to cash counterfeit checks. When the investigators asked him about the business card he took from Dr. Matsui, he told them that his wallet had been stolen the previous summer and that all the cards in it were lost. The second and most important thing the police learned from their investigations was that Saramichi had deposited 130,000 yen into his bank account in the days following the incident, specifically within the same week. Although the amount wasn't exactly the same as the amount that was stolen, it was very close and still a significant sum. When the investigators asked him where he got this amount from, he refused to talk or confess. This, of course, made them more suspicious, especially since Saramichi's financial situation was very difficult at that time, particularly after the war, when no one seemed interested in buying his paintings or artwork. People didn't have the time to buy luxuries. Everyone was focused on their daily sustenance. The salary Saramichi received for teaching was so little that it barely covered his needs and sometimes wasn't enough for anything. So where did he get the 130,000 yen to deposit into his account? And he also deposited it in the same week that the theft occurred. He refused to speak or provide any explanation about the source of this money, which made him the prime suspect in the case, especially when we add his previous attempts to cash counterfeit checks from banks. Despite all this, everyone around Saramichi, his family and friends, testified that he was a kind man, impossible to harm even an ant. So even if he was willing to steal and commit forgery, how could he commit such a heinous crime? This wasn't just a theft. It was a massacre. The police arrested Saramichi and took him to their headquarters in Tokyo, where they began long and intense interrogations with him. One of the things they did was bring in the 4 surviving employees from the incident to give their testimonies and see his face. They also brought in 7 other witnesses who were present near the bank at the time of the incident. The total number of witnesses was 11, but typically, when the police conduct such procedures, they present suspects and make witnesses identify the criminal, usually having several suspects so that each witness sees all of them and points to the one they believe is the criminal. However, in this case, Saramichi stood alone in the room as there were no other suspects, which is inherently wrong in the investigative process. It's natural for witnesses to psychologically lean towards pointing at only one person, but imagine that among the 11 witnesses, 6 of them said, "No, this isn't the criminal who entered the bank," while the remaining 5 said they felt a resemblance between him and the criminal, but they weren't able to confirm whether it was him or not. This means there wasn't a single witness who confirmed that he was the criminal. Saramichi, for his part, of course, denied all the accusations and insisted he couldn't explain where he got the money he deposited in his account. Here, the police brought in an investigator named Hachi Tsuka. Hachi was known for his inhumane interrogation methods. Imagine that he could make the suspect sit at the interrogation table for dozens of hours without moving, and a single session could last more than an entire day. During the interrogation, the suspect was not allowed any breaks, and even if he felt drowsy or tried to sleep, they would pour water on him and shout at him, keeping him in a constant state of pressure, a form of unbearable psychological and physical torture. After 3 days of this condition, imagine that due to the intense psychological torture Saramichi experienced, he stole a pen from the interrogation room, and when they returned him to his cell, he inflicted a serious wound on himself with the pen and wrote the words "I am innocent" in blood in large letters on the wall. One of the guards quickly discovered the situation and took Saramichi to the hospital, saving his life. But imagine that Saramichi also attempted to commit suicide twice after that, once on September 22nd and once on September 24th. All these actions were a result of the pressure and psychological torture he endured. 3 days later, in his last suicide attempt, specifically on September 27, 1948, Saramichi confessed to the crime, claiming he was the one who executed the operation. Initially, he made oral confessions, and later they obtained a written confession from him, dated October 5, 1948. This means they succeeded in extracting a confession from him. However, after the time he spent in prison, and the investigations and psychological torture he endured, he fell into a state of shock, becoming unaware of the things around him and remained in the hospital for weeks undergoing treatment. After he recovered somewhat, his trial began. Imagine that when he later stood in court, he denied all the confessions he had made, stating that the oral confession taken from him was due to the torture he had endured. And as for the written confession, he claimed he had not signed it, that his signature was forged, and that the entire confession was fabricated. Of course, Saramichi was still suffering from shock during the trial, and he was not in the best mental state, but he was desperate to deny the charges against him, insisting that the confessions he was being prosecuted on were false. During the trial, a significant point emerged from the analyses conducted by the 2 universities' hospitals regarding the poison found in the bodies. As previously mentioned, the victims' bodies were sent to the University of Tokyo and Keio University. The University of Tokyo concluded that the poison was potassium cyanide, while Keio University reached a different result, stating that the poison was cyanohydrin, which is derived from cyanide. Of course, both are toxic compounds, but the difference between them is substantial. The first compound, potassium cyanide, is relatively easy to prepare, and anyone with basic knowledge can produce it at home. On the other hand, cyanohydrin is a complex compound that cannot be synthesized by just anyone. Another crucial point is that the method of killing with potassium cyanide contradicts the facts presented in the case. Potassium cyanide causes immediate death. If the perpetrator had used this poison, the victims would have died instantly from the pain, leading to a state of panic at the scene. Conversely, the second compound, cyanohydrin, kills in a manner that aligns closely with the eyewitness accounts of the incident, as its burning effects and efficacy begin minutes after ingestion. It does not cause immediate death. Thus, it is probable and reasonable that the compound used in the crime is cyanohydrin. However, the problem is that this compound is not something that just anyone can prepare. In fact, this compound is linked to something frightening concerning Japan's military history. There was a special chemical unit in the Japanese Army officially known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Unit, abbreviated as Unit 731. This unit has a notoriously dark reputation and is known for conducting dangerous experiments on humans. The things I heard about it during my research on the subject are incredibly horrifying, some of which I can't even mention. Unit 731 was terrifying in every sense of the word. They typically conducted their experiments on prisoners of war, particularly Chinese and Soviet individuals, testing on them unbelievable things, such as chemicals, and performing vivisections, experimenting with various toxins and viruses. If I were to tell you the details I encountered, you wouldn't be able to sleep that night. While researching this topic, I saw disgusting and terrifying things that you would find shocking yourself. The important thing is that after the war, following Japan's surrender, orders were issued by the Army's high command to the soldiers working there to burn and destroy everything, as the secrets, documents, and records they held would have led to many leaders of the Japanese Army being prosecuted as first-degree war criminals. Imagine, they destroyed most of the documents and records that existed in the unit. However, the American authorities occupying Japan later announced that all individuals who had worked in Unit 731 would be granted immunity in exchange for revealing the secrets they knew about the unit and the experiments they conducted. Indeed, many leaders, soldiers, and scientists who had worked in this unit took advantage of the opportunity and received immunity, meaning that no matter the details that emerged afterward, they would not be prosecuted as war criminals. Many of them were scientists and doctors, and it is shocking to think that many continued their lives and work in large hospitals after receiving immunity and confessing to many of the horrific experiments they had conducted under the banner of this unit. The topic of Unit 731 is very dark and extensive, and discussing it could take a long time. However, all you need to know is that the compound we are discussing, cyanohydrin, discovered in the bodies, was one of the results of their experiments in that unit. This is the most important point related to our case. So the question now is, where could a person like Saramichi, a mere painter, obtain such a poison? It is impossible for it to be available except from someone who had worked in that unit or someone with a direct connection to it. Hence, the theory emerged that the perpetrator of the crime was likely a former soldier or doctor from Unit 731. There was a conclusion that the Japanese authorities pinned the blame on Saramichi because they wanted to cover up the matter and close this topic, as the Japanese authorities do not acknowledge Unit 731 to this day and never speak about it. The issue surrounding it is treated as a secret that no one should know about, even though most people in Japan are aware of it. Thus, the Japanese authorities did not want to discuss the compound or Unit 731, so they kept the case pinned on Saramichi. Even though Saramichi denied the charges and showed confessions that were extracted from him under torture, the judicial system in Japan treated confessions as absolute evidence, regardless of how they were obtained. Imagine, during the trial, explanations emerged to justify the things they had accused him of. The first was his attempt to cash forged checks before the robbery, and the second was the large amount he deposited in the bank after the robbery. The justifications for the first incident involving check forgery were due to a medical condition that affected his mind after being bitten by a rabid dog. When doctors attempted to treat him and prescribe medications, he fell into a coma for 3 months. After regaining consciousness from the coma, he suffered from a mental syndrome that caused him to forget and act contrary to his nature, known as Korsakoff syndrome. This mental illness was the reason he attempted to cash the forged checks, and he submitted documented medical reports to support this claim. As for the second point, the amount he deposited in the bank just days after the robbery, some of his relatives testified that Ceramici sometimes worked on pornographic drawings because they sold quickly. He felt compelled to resort to this work due to his financial difficulties. But of course, this was a secret endeavor, and if word got out, it would tarnish his reputation. This is why he couldn't admit the source of the money, which explained the large amount he deposited in the bank. As for the timing of his deposit just days after the robbery, it was merely a coincidence. Essentially, the two charges against him were circumstantial evidence and not definitive proof that could conclusively determine his guilt. However, despite all this, after a lengthy trial lasting about 2 years, on July 24, 1950, Ceramici was found guilty and officially sentenced to death. The strange thing is that Ceramici was never executed, as the Minister of Justice could not sign the death warrant. Imagine that ministers of justice changed over the years, yet none of them managed to take the step of signing Ceramici's death sentence, indicating they were not convinced of his guilt. Typically, prisoners on death row in Japan are executed within a week at most. Yet Ceramici broke that record and remained in prison for decades. He spent years in prison when he was supposed to be executed, but never was. The other problem was that Ceramici always tried to file for an appeal or a retrial, but his requests were denied, and this situation persisted for many long years, leaving Ceramici incarcerated. His situation was very strange. During his imprisonment, he was allowed to pursue his craft of painting, and over the years, he created more than 1,300 paintings while in prison. The tools, paint, and materials he needed for his artwork were provided by his supporters and admirers. Relatives and friends who cared for him formed a socially active group to support him and raise awareness about his case. However, despite all their efforts, Ceramici remained locked up until 1987. He died in prison at the age of 95 after suffering from illness, having spent 40 years behind bars. The story of this man is incredibly sad. Although he was officially considered the perpetrator of the crime and the case was closed, I believe that the mystery surrounding this case remains unsolved to this day. This is a belief held by many of Ceramici's supporters and relatives, who continued to submit requests to the judicial system for a retrial even after his death, with the latest request made in 2015. In total, 20 requests for a retrial were submitted, all of which were rejected. This case is certainly one of the most famous in Japan, spawning numerous theories and speculations, especially with the existence of a mysterious entity like Unit 731. However, even Ceramici's exoneration from the charges does not necessarily mean that the perpetrator was from Unit 731. It is possible that someone obtained the poison through other means. Some theories even suggest that this incident could have been an American experiment on humans, wanting to test the secrets they uncovered from Unit 731. This theory could explain why the criminal left a large amount of money in the bank when he could have escaped, yet he did not. However, this theory is also considered implausible. And here we reach the end of the story. These are some of the previous chilling segments you can watch if you'd like. Thank you for following along. I'll see you in the next segments.